On Wednesday, the 9th of February 2022, the UK Atomic Energy Authority, together with EUROfusion, announced that the experimental fusion device JET had just broken the world record for the most fusion energy produced in a single pulse. But what does that actually mean for the future of fusion energy, and where have those numbers actually come from? My name's Leah, and welcome to Leah Loves Science, where I answer niche, but necessary, science questions. Today, I want to tell you a story about the history and the future of fusion energy. The Joint European Torus, or JET, is a magnetically confined experimental fusion device in Oxfordshire in the UK. Magnetically confined experimental fusion device just means that JET is a big fusion experiment that controls its fusion fuel using magnets. Specifically, JET is something called a tokamak. When it was built in the late 1970s, early 1980s, JET was heralded as the most advanced, most high-tech, most fancy tokamak in the whole world. And in many ways, it still is. JET is the largest fusion experiment of its kind, and to this day remains the only tokamak capable of running with the fusion fuel tritium. The design of JET actually has informed the design of many future tokamaks, and by extension, many future power stations. When JET was built, its job was to tell us how to actually run one of these big experimental fusion devices, how to run a tokamak. What does an experiment look like in the control room? How do you actually run and fine-tune the machine? And what challenges appear when you actually go down and try and fix it? We get data from JET by running a series of scientific experiments called a scientific campaign. And then we shut down for a period of time and make changes based on what we've learned. And then we do another scientific campaign, and it kind of goes on like that. So JET's job is to teach us how to build the next generation of tokamaks. Specifically, how to build ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, which is 10 times the size of JET, and it's being built in the south of France right now. There are lots of fusion experiments contributing to the design of ITER, but no machine is as close in design as JET. Only JET has the same internal materials, and only JET can operate with tritium. In fact, ITER was actually designed based on some experiments run on JET in 1997. In 1997, we ran our first campaign on JET using the same fuel that we planned to use in ITER. Specifically, this was deuterium and tritium mixed together. Deuterium and tritium are both forms of hydrogen, and for reasons I won't get into right now, they're likely going to be the fusion fuels that we use in the future. During the 1997 campaign, or DTE1, JET reached the record energy peak for a single pulse, and it reached this peak for a fraction of a second. And at the same time as running these, advanced DT experiments, JET was also focused on running sustained high-performance plasmas. Now, these were plasmas that were, 1, stable in terms of fusion energy, they were running for long periods of time, and 2, they were running for long periods of time. They were telling us what was happening inside the tokamak when we ran these big plasmas. And in 1997, the JET campaign produced a fusion plasma that ran for 4 seconds at 22 megajoules. And this was actually a second world record because this was the most fusion energy out for energy put in ever. And that number is called the Q factor. So the Q factor tells us how close we are to energy break-even. So how much fusion energy are we making and how much energy did we put in? And these results informed the design of ITER. So ITER is aiming to be the first tokamak that produces more fusion energy than energy you put in. So ITER is aiming for a Q factor of 1. Actually, that is a lie. ITER is aiming for a Q factor of 10. So ITER is aiming to be the first tokamak to produce 10 times as much fusion energy as energy that went into powering it. And then we use the results from ITER to design the next generation of tokamaks. And these tokamaks will likely be the first ones to produce actual electricity, so they'd be viable to use in a power plant. And in 1997, everything seemed to be on track. We'd just broken these 2 world records, and it was proving our physics models to be correct, which was super important. But there was something happening inside the machine, something unforeseen, because the road to fusion power was never an easy road. Inside the machine, there are a series of protective tiles, and these tiles are made out of carbon. Now, carbon protective tiles inside your machine is fairly standard for a tokamak. You were going to build a tokamak today, they would probably have carbon tiles. The problem was that when we ran the machine, these carbon tiles were absorbing some of our fuel and then not giving it back. Specifically, these carbons were absorbing a lot of tritium. Now, no one had ever noticed this before because no one had ever really bothered using tritium inside the machine. Tritium is a form of hydrogen, so it's got all the downsides of hydrogen. It's got very small particles, it gets stuck in things really easily, and it basically escapes whatever container you try and put it in. And tritium has the added fun bonus of being very slightly radioactive, which means it's a restricted substance. You can only hold a little bit of it on your site before you have to go and get like nuclear permission and stuff. So usually that wouldn't be a problem because in fusion, the reaction is so efficient that you only need a really small amount of fusion fuel. The problem comes when your wall stops absorbing some of that fusion fuel that you need to run your experiment. So for something like ITER, if the wall is absorbing all of this fuel, it starts to become not viable in terms of fusion energy. So we needed our wall to absorb 10 times less tritium than it was currently absorbing, which was kind of a problem. But luckily, the JET team had a solution. They decided the best route here was to take out all of the carbon tiles and replace them with a fully metal wall. This wall was made of tungsten and beryllium. Now, this was no mean feat. Inside of JET, there are almost 16,000 protective tiles, and each one would have to be replaced with a brand new tile. Now, a lot of these new tiles came fully formed from the UK and from places in the US, but some of them had to be assembled onto carriers by hand. These carriers were then handed over to our remote handling team. So the inside of an experimental tokamak is not the nicest place to work. For one, some of these tiles, the beryllium ones, are not very safe to be handling. And for two, you have to take in a personal air supply. So you can imagine this looks very much like a spacesuit, and you have a big tube that's connected to a personal air supply, and they're just a nightmare to work in. It is not a nice place at all. So to avoid sending people into this awkward and kind of nasty environment, we have a remote handling team that sends in something called Mascot. Now you can think of Mascot as a pair of arms that can go places that people just can't. And Mascot is controlled by a second pair of matching arms in a room far, far away from our tokamak. So Mascot placed almost all the tiles, which worked great, except we still needed someone to go in and make the final adjustments. So a team of highly skilled technicians ended up going in and finishing off the tiles by hand. And they took in a tiny saw and a tiny hoover because some of the tiles had to be cut to shape in place. So this was a monumental effort, and they finally finished replacing them in 2011. So then we had our new metal wall. We called it the ITER-like wall because scientists are not very inventive when it comes to names, and it was the wall that was going to be like the wall in ITER. So we were really excited to turn JET back on and see if the wall worked. Our model showed that it would, so better hope it did. It didn't. So when we turned on JET after replacing the whole wall, all 16,000 tiles, we found that the plasmas were no longer as efficient as they were beforehand. They were no longer producing the nice plasmas that we needed to make ITER work. And this was bad news because our model showed it should work. And if the models were wrong and ITER was designed on the models, then ITER was wrong and we just spent like billions of dollars building a tokamak that was never going to work properly. But no need to fear. The people who work on JET are the most best tokamak operators in the whole world. And they spent years running plasmas and finely tuning the magnets, finely tuning the scenarios, until they finally had a tokamak with a new metal wall that was producing the plasmas we expected from the models, which was great. We then went through a series of operational periods where we ran lots of scientific experiments, and shutdowns where we closed the machine and made some changes. We didn't operate with tritium again because, number one, tritium's just a pain in the butt, and number two, our experiments didn't really call for it. That is until 2020. So in 2020, I was feeling pretty chuffed with myself. I had managed to convince not one, but two people to train me in the JET control room. And I was extremely excited to be a part of what was arguably JET's biggest and most exciting scientific campaign ever. And then in March 2020, something really weird happened and our whole control room ended up shutting down. And to keep our operations and our operational teams safe, they kicked everyone who was non-essential out of the control room. And it turns out trainees are non-essential people in this scenario. So I was gutted as...
You can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half. And now.
I was gutted because it meant the experimental campaign started without me. And through a series of daily testing, locking the whole building down, and loads of scientists calling in from all over the world via Zoom, the next scientific campaign on JET got going. So this was called DTE2, and the goal of this campaign was to use tritium again to repeat the 1997 experiments and improve on them. So while the 1997 results were super cool, you know, they had that really high energy peak and they ran their first high performance long-term plasmas. For fusion to work in a power plant scenario, we need to show that we can run long stable plasmas at a high energy. So it needed to be high energy and long, not just high or just long. So that's what the aim of DTE2 was. Now, while JET is capable of doing this, it is the absolute maximum of what JET is capable of. So it's the operational limit. It's the most any of the components can actually do. So on the very last day of DTE2, the JET team decided it was time to rerun these huge experiments and push JET to its absolute limit. The last day of the campaign is always the best day to do this because, you know, it ends the campaign on a high note. And also, if you end up breaking your tokamak, you have plenty of time to fix your tokamak. So the end of the campaign was going to be the last day. It was extremely exciting. So the JET team all sat down, everyone was prepared, everyone knew what they were going to be doing. And by pushing JET to its absolute limit, they managed to run a 5-second stable plasma at 42 megajoules. So this was almost double what they achieved in 1997. But that wasn't enough for the JET team. They took a look at the data and they were like, I think we can do higher than this. So they adjusted the fuel mix and managed to run a second plasma, again pushing JET to its absolute limit, and managed to achieve 59 megajoules for 5 seconds. Now, this might not seem like a particularly long time, but number one, that is the world record for the most energy produced. And number two, in terms of fusion, 5 seconds is a lifetime. If you can hold a stable plasma for 5 seconds, you know that you can scale up that time and run it for as long as you need to. JET can't run any longer because in the 1970s, when they installed the magnets, they chose to do copper magnets. And at the time, this was cutting edge technology, but these days we'd be using superconducting magnets. So basically, our magnets get too hot to run for longer than 5 seconds. And the most important part of all of this is it proves our physics models are correct. It proves that we haven't wasted a bunch of money building ITER in France, and it shows we know what we're doing and we can scale the physics up from inside JET to make ITER a possibility. This was achieved by an extremely talented team of scientists and engineers and technicians, and a really diverse group of people from all over the world. And it really shows what we can achieve on these massive international projects when everyone works together. And I'm so excited to see what scientific advances and what new problems ITER is going to bring when it opens in the 2020s. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like below and subscribe to the channel via the orb. And if you want to see more videos like this, we have a playlist for you right here. Bye!